morning, folks. Coming from England, from across the pond, let me start off with a story I just shared with the women. English exports. About 25 years ago, there was a girl, a woman, who had just finished her 2-year stint in the Israeli army. And afterwards, 2 years, harsh conditions. Many Israelis, after army service, after military service, they tour the world, make a bit of a life, have a breather. And this girl who came from a non-observant background happened to find herself in London, Iraq. And although she wasn't observant, but when a person suddenly comes to the diaspora and comes across a strange tribe, otherwise known as Goyim, they begin to feel a bit rootless. They need an anchor. And she decided she wants to, for the first time in her life, study a bit about Judaism. She wasn't from, but she wanted to learn. Being a highly intelligent woman, she realized the source of all proper learning is the Gemara. She doesn't want a third-rate, course from Bali Tshuva, whatever. She wanted the real McCoy, the core, the essence, Gemara. England, as I said, is a very, I don't want to be offensive to my adopted hometown, but as there's an American actress who once said, when it's 3 p.m. in New York, it's 1938 in London. And it's they say deploring change is the unchangeable habit of all Englishmen. So a woman to find the Gemara shir in London is a bit problematic. You're not going to find it. She went over to a rabbi, who I know, and she asked him, she heard he gives a shir in English, would she be able to join the shir? The rabbi was a bit taken aback, was unheard of, especially 25 years ago. After thinking over the matter, okay, you could come, sit in the back somewhere, don't make a squeak. Don't want to hear from you. Just sit there, fine. Cut a long story short, after a few weeks in this Gemara shir, and there's a Gemara shir which you have a lot of scholarly people, a lot of Rabbonim sitting at the shir, they suddenly come to a very arcane, obscure, difficult, intricate, complicated, complex sugya. And the Maggid shir, the rabbi giving the shir, begins to try to venture in interpretation, to no avail. He gives a zapshat, right? And the other Rabbonim start slugging him up. And they can't come to Emek HaShava, they can't come to Pshat. Zebechui. And the rabbi throws up his hands and says, you know what? Everyone go home, take the Gemara, break your brains, right? And let's see tomorrow someone comes up with Pshat in this Gemara. Comes tomorrow, the Maggid shir gives another Pshat, and again they schlepped them up, and back and forth. Finally, this little Israeli soldier girl pipes up like a church mouse. Rabbi, I know Pshat in the Gemara. Everyone looks at the Rabbonim who spent years in yeshiva, can't figure it out. She tells them Pshat, and the Pshat is kafter v'ferach. It's gorgeous, it's stunning, it's mind-boggling. And everybody asks, how in the world did you come to that Pshat? It was not shaykh. I'll tell you the truth, you told us to do homework. I took my art scroll Gemara, whatever they had in those days, the Steinsaltz, whatever, right, with a interpretation, and I started trying to make heads or tails to no avail. And it was bugging me, it was bothering me. I couldn't fall asleep. And then I suddenly fell asleep over the Gemara, and I had a dream. And in the dream, I was sitting by a river in some Middle Eastern country, hot climate, like England. And suddenly a fellow with a radiant countenance comes over to me, and he sees me crying by this river, and he says, Biti, my daughter, why are you crying? And she says, because I'm learning this Gemara in my shir, and no one could understand what it means. Just show me the page, I'll tell you. She goes through, in her dream, she goes through the passage, I'll tell you Pshat. And he proceeds to explain her what the Gemara means. And it's mamish gorgeous, it's Sasayim Yishak. It just, everything fits in, it's obvious, it's self-evident. He says, thank you very much, but tell me, Rabbi, what is your name? To which the rabbi says, my name is Rav Ashi. Have a good day. And Vayikatz, she wakes up from her dream, and she remembers the Pshat vividly. And the next day, when everyone is arguing, right? She tells the rabbi in the shir, Pshat in the Gemara. The guy the rabbi in the shir, a fine fellow, he's involved with Kira, but he didn't know, what was this girl smoking last night? What's she on? But on the other hand, she's not shy to come to us. What's going on here? He went to the Padzva, who was our Bezdin of London, McKen Glebe. You could trust us. And I heard this story from the person who had the Maggid shir, it was mind-boggling, right? I thought to myself, is the Charaya the Tayirkai, how precious Rav Ashi comes to a river in Babylon, where this Chayelet is sitting there crying, to tell a pshat in the Gemara, how tired Torah is. Torah for everybody. Boom. Last night we were watching the video, the Maris Kodesh, of 50 years ago when the Rebbe came down, that special Shabbos, same Kviyas, right? And the Rebbe was told the famous story of Kol Nar Boicha, and the Rebbe spoke, the theme of the Rebbe's Sicha was how Torah is shaykh to every single individual Yiddish neshama. There's no noble elite. In the Lubavitch, generally the policy was to have an open, unlike Rabban Gamliel, that someone who's not Teichik Kabari al Yikonis Lebes HaMedrash. In the Lubavitch, the Rebbe Shita was Torah is shaykh to every single Jew. Everyone, without exception. And I want to discuss today what is the source of this Shita and how it fits into a general worldview of Lubavitch and the Rebbe, starting with the Alter Rebbe. And Bechal, just behektim, parenthetically, let me add, I remember a few years ago I was in New York, and one of the Mashpiyah from Eretz Yisrael gave him the most brilliant shir explaining that Chabad generally, but in Chabad Gufa, of all the 7 generations of the Siyam, Dafka the Rebbe in the Sidarenu is the one who takes always, he gave numerous examples from my Morim, it was a brilliant shir, it was mind-boggling. The Rebbe, the land, in the highest of possible madregas, he speaks in the highest possible madregas, and then he translates it from the highest of high to the lowest of low. That's Der Hashri. Look, damn, I just saw one of the things they were giving out on Shabbos. Rabbi Yosef Chazan, my good friend, told the story that his father was asked by the Rebbe to get involved in some political issue in the public school system in New York. And he asked other Rabbanim to get involved, and they said, like, what's it going to do with us? What are we going to do with Jews? And the Rebbe said, I can't bear to see a chasm, a schism, a division between Atzilus and Asiyah. It's mamish ofani. It's like, it's characterized, the Rebbe Shita take the highest of high and the lowest of low. And this is relevant very much in this sugya of learning Torah. And I want to start from the beginning. Back a few years ago, there was a fellow in Eretz Yisrael, and he was offered to take a course, to get a PhD, to get the alphabet soup after his name, in Talmudic studies, in a university. And he asked the former Sephardi chief rabbi, Rav Yosef, is it proper? We'll soon see how the Alter Rebbe learns Pshat. And from this, the whole Chabad Shita stems. He asked, is it proper to learn Torah for an ulterior motive in order to get my PhD? A simple shayla. So he begins by quoting the famous Gemara, Margel b'pumei derava, a pearl, a diamond in the mouth of Rava, that tachlis tshuva, tachlis chochma, Torah, tshuva masan tovim, the purpose of wisdom is that when it's translated to reality. The purpose of Torah, you should learn Torah and then kick, rebel against your parents, against the Eibishter, etc., etc. Shenema reishis chachma yiras Hashem zeich levach aleisayim la'oisam lo'nemer ela lo'isayim la'oisim l'shma v'lo l'oism l'shma. Torah, proper Torah, is only when you're motivated to do the Torah Lishma. Right? Yes, and Chazal say in numerous places, a person who studies Torah shalei l'shma noyach lo shalei nivra, you would have been better off not to have been born. The mother's placenta should have turned rolled over and you were dead on arrival, right? Rather than come into this world and learn Torah Shalishma. Toisis Alasar in the Gemara in Brachas Daf Yud Zayin, in other places in Shas. Toisis asked the glaring question, which Rashi was very bothered. How could you say that Torah Shalishma, Chazal say, becomes a Samad de Musa, a potion of death? Right? It's better you shouldn't have been born, etc., etc. When the Gemara has a statement all over Shas, a maimer of Omar Rabbi Yehuda Marav, L'olam yilmad adam shaloi lishma. Every school child knows. Shemituch shaloi lishma bal lishma. Better learn Torah even for wrong motivation shaloi lishma, because eventually you'll be motivated too for the right reasons. Rashi, Toisus, many Rishonim say there's a crucial distinction. I'm skimming over all the gory details. I'm getting back to the core, to the essence. Tosfos says there's a difference in what is your motivation. There's 2 madregas, 2 bechinas in Shalei Lishma. A person learns Torah for ego, for kovid, to be called Rebbe, to get a parnosa, to make it your profession. It ain't great, right? But on this we say, Mitoch Shalei Lishma, Bo Lishma. If a person is learning Torah lekanter, In other words, the Rav is giving a shir, and you want to show him up publicly. So you prepare the Mari Mekaymas before, so when the Rav comes, you shlug him up. That's the counter for negative reasons. Likewise, according to other sources, when a person learns Torah with no intention of carrying out the consequences of that which he learns, so his Torah becomes mamish, a purely academic exercise, then we say your Torah becomes samamoves, better you shouldn't have been born. You with me? That's Tosfos's crucial distinction. The Rambam, Perik Yud Hilchos Tshuva Halacha Daled. Let me do the Lashon. Based on the Gemara in the Dorim. Omru Chachamim Harishonim. Shema Toimer Harini Loimet Torah B'shvil She'yeh Oshir, Oy B'shvil She'eker Rebbe, Oy B'shvil She'ekabel Schar Ba'olam Habo. Maybe I learn Torah in order for prestige, honor, a nice shtickle of Yosin, Olam Habo, or of Sharabor if you prefer. Talmud Loimer Lahavos Hashem. Kol Ma'ashatem Oisim L'Sasa El Mahavos Hashem. Whatever you do has to be motivated by a love of the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Chein Amru Chacham and Avodah Zarah Daf Yutes. The mitzvahs of Chafetz V'Oiv LeBeschar mitzvahs. The person desires to covet the mitzvah, not the reward. And therefore Chazal say, Al Tiyu Kavodim Mashamshin Esarav. We all know these statements. Don't serve the Rebbeinu Shalom, Amanas the Kabbalah process, etc., etc. Then the Rambam continues in Allah Ches. Kol Oisik B'Torah. Anyone who studies Torah, Kidei LeKabel Schar Ba'olam Habo. In order to what? Get reward in the hereafter. Or that nothing negative should befall it. You know, the Eibush is balabasa over this world. I don't want to strike me down with lightning. So I'll learn Torah, which is magnum matzah the Gemara Simtzaita, is protected. Yeah? Says the Rambam, how is the Oisik Shaloi Lishma? It's Shaloi Lishma. Aber v'omru chachamim la'olam yasik adam b'Torah Shaloi Lishma sh'b'Torah Shaloi Lishma. So it's clear according to the Rambam, and this is clear in the Ritzvah, in Yuma Tavayin Beis, unlike Rashi and Tosfos, who make a distinction that if I learn Shaloi Lishma for Kovid, Eker Rebbe, for Ashirus, right, that's permissible. It's only Almanas Lekanter, for negative reasons, or as a purely intellectual exercise, that it's becomes Samadimovis. According to the Rambam, he starts off all Torah, Shaloi Lishma, is negative. General statement. In the next halacha he says, but if you're learning Torah for one of two reasons, either because you want reward in the hereafter, or you want to learn Torah in order that Eibush should protect you from any misfortunes in this world. In other words, things where the give and take is in the hands of the Almighty, not in the hands of man, then we say Mitzvah Shaloi Lishma. Is the Charaya according to Shittas HaRambam, unlike the Tosfos, any other Shaloi Lishma, to get a PhD, to make a profession of it, to get COVID, is all negative and is all prohibited. So the Rambam seems to be taking a much more stringent view than most other Rishonim. Are you with me? Yeah? Okay, everyone have it? Everyone understand it? It's clear as mud? Yeah? It's like economics. If you're not confused, you're not paying attention. You got it. Nevertheless, Rav Yosef ends his tshuva, we'll soon see, even according to the restrictive sheet of the Rambam, who seems to be saying in Hilchos Tshuva that the only type of Shaloi Lishma which is permitted, B'diova, Shaloi Lishma is when it's in the hands of God, right? Either Shtikul of Yosin or Olam Habo or the protection, divine protection down here, that's permitted, but all other types of Shaloi Lishma seem to be prohibited. What if a person has a dual motivation? In other words, I want a PhD. So on one hand, this is Shaloi Lishma. On the other hand, I could take a PhD in sociology, anthropology, zoology, zoology. Why did I choose a PhD in Talmudic studies? Oh, so there's a Lishma, and together with a Lo Lishma. What if a person has a dual motivation of Lishma and Shaloi Lishma? The Rav Yosef quotes the Shvus Yankin, Chelik Gimel, Siman Kuf Lamed Ches, based on the Gemara in Yevamis Daf Lamed Tes. Everyone knows the Shita of Abba Shol in the Gemara, that a person who makes Yibum, someone never dies, Rahman al childless, and the widow has to perform Yibum with the brother, right? And Abba Shol is of the opinion that if you miyabim l'shem noyo l'shem momin, harizek ilu pageya erva bashuk, it's as if you are, it's like an incestuous type of relationship. The mitzvah of marrying a sister-in-law is only permitted posthumously for the sake of the mitzvah. But if you have a dual motivation, l'shem mitzvah and l'shem moment or noi, then it becomes permissible. So by extension, by analogy, he says, well, if your shaloi lishma is coupled with lishma, it's acceptable. End of Rabbi Avad Yosef's responso, which is relevant to us. Stop. Let me act just parenthetically, just to confuse you a bit more before we try to shed some light on the subject. Generally, if a person has a dual motivation, lishma and shaloi lishma, is it acceptable or not? Stop. Let's stop it. A person brings the korban. First Mishnah in Zvach. Right? But it's lishma and shaloi lishma. Huh? So it's like everyone knows the Gemara in Pesachim Daf Nun Tes, it's the Gemara in Zvach and Daf Yud Lishma and shaloi lishma by kachim is possible. Tosfos says in a few places, by extension, if I'm dyeing tzitzis, lishma for the sake of the mitzvah of tzitzis, and shaloi lishma, I work for a chemical firm. I want to try out new dyes, see what's effective. Lishma and shaloi lishma, by analogy to kachim, right? It's also disqualified. And I'm not getting involved in this. Is a famous Rebbe Chonon, because it's Shkevim Shiurim, because Beis, for Rebbe Chaim, who disagree. A get, Lishma and Shaloi Lishma. Right? Is it acceptable or not? So the Achronim, the Heintiger, the Rosh Yeshivas, the Lomdim, I'm saying this parenthetically, if you don't get this word, you don't get it. It's not pertinent, not germane to the general idea. He says, when the Lishma is the Chayet to the Chetz of the mitzvah, part of the essence, the core of the mitzvah, it creates the mitzvah. Then a mixture of motivation, lishma and shaloi lishma, is tainted, it's no good. When the chetz of the mitzvah is there, and the lishma is that in the gavra, in the person, whether I have fulfilled it properly, my motivation is personal, then lishma and shaloi lishma is. So it would appear from this extension, I have no time to go through all the rayas and Reb Chaim or Reb Melville, bottom line is that it appears, therefore, they want to say that if I learn Torah, and I'm motivated by different factors, both for spiritual, altruistic reasons, and personal ego, personal gain. The Torah is 100% a valid Torah. I fulfill the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. My lishma, my motivation epis, the gavros felt epis. Then we say mitzvah shaloi lishma lishma. I want to show you that it's not necessarily so. It's very dubious, this argument. And by doing so, I'm going to show you what one few words in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch changes a person's whole perspective on life. Alter Rebbe, there were people I know, Polish Yidden, Talmidei Chachamim, Gedolim, Rosh Yeshivas, they learned by people like Rabbi Arik, etc., etc. They told them if there's a sugya, generally, I'm throwing it parenthetically, if there's ever learning a Gemara, and there's an Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch who's behandled this Indian, you can't begin to understand anything without being medayik. As far as I'm saying, from one extra letter in Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch, you can answer Kiva Eiger's kashas. All that bothers Achronim, if you're medayik in Alter Rebbe, there's gold there, and all we got to do is mind the gold. Let me give you an example. Let's do the Rambam. We'll start off with the Rambam. The Rambam says in Hilchos Talmud Torah. Let me read the whole lashon. The Rambam says, "Perek Gimel Halacha Gimel." Ein lecha mitzvah b'chol mitzvahs kulan sheish kula keneged Talmud Torah. El Talmud Torah keneged kula. In other words, Alter Rebbe says, if you have a scale weighing their value, you have 612 mitzvahs on one side of the scale, and on the other side of the scale you have the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah is balanced keneged kula. There's no single individual mitzvah which is equal to the potency, the power of Talmud Torah. Okay, you with me? Therefore, a Talmud koydem l'maisa b'chol makom. So says the Rambam. There's a supremacy of limud haTorah. There's a word I just told the women. I heard once there was a Rabbi Heller from Heights, when the Koil had a father. He lived in Schweiz, Switzerland, and the big Talmud Chacham. And he was once there when two big Talmud Chacham, the Strasburger Rov and the Rachav Rov, went to visit Rav Elvel Brisker, who was there vacationing in Arosa somewhere. And he said up, so they asked him a kasha. You're not going to like this word. You're going to kill me for saying this. It's a murder deep words. He said there's a Gemara in Tainis Daf Yud. The Gemara says that two Talmidei Chachamim walking on the path, on the road, and ein beinayim divrei Torah, there's no Torah between them. They're worthy of being consumed by a fire. And what's the raya? Remember Elio and Novi and Elisha were walking, and they were enveloped with fire, right? If not for the fact, they would have been consumed. What happened there? What was Dvar B'Telim? Says Tosfos, they were talking Dvar B'Telim. A mensch. Stellt sich the Klotzkasche, right? You open up a Tanakh, in the Book of Kings. You don't got to be a genius. It's in the comic book version of the Bible also. You open up, and what are they talking about? Elisha's about to leave this world to go up Pesai Rashamayim. And Elisha, his devoted disciple, says, I want a double portion of your prophetic powers. That's what you call Dvorim B'Teilim? That's like the highest of Madregas. They asked us the Briskerov, the Grizz. And he answered that vis-a-vis Talmud Torah, everything else is Dvorim B'Teilim. Talmud Torah is Kineged Kul. You hear about it? Yeah? Then the Rambam continues. Let's go further. Tchilas dinoi shel Adam. I want you to listen carefully to the Rambam. Tchilas dinoi shel Adam eino ala divrei Torah. After 120 years, when your soul ascends to the celestial bar of judgment, the first question you're asked is, have you studied Torah? So far so good. Tchilas dinoi shel Adam ala divrei Torah. Lefichach. What does the word lefichach mean? Therefore, right? The sages taught us le'olam yasik adam b'Torah ben lishma ben shaloi lishma, whether or not your motives are pure. Anyone out there home? Anyone home? Can anyone please explain me this Rambam? Where does the first clause and the second clause, how do they dovetail? How do they fit in? Lefichach means because we have the first halacha, right? Which the first halacha tells me that chilas dinui shel adam eino ela divrei Torah. There's nothing which is more supreme than learning Torah. Therefore, you should learn Torah even for the wrong reasons, for the wrong motivation. And what would be if Torah would be on the checklist of 1 billion questions Bezdin Shalmaila is going to ask you? It will be question number 5. It wouldn't be chilas dinui shel adam. Therefore, you shouldn't study Torah Lishma. Should be Torah Lishma. How does the fact that Talmud Torah is the first question you're asking Bezdin Shalmaila, how does that teach me that therefore you should learn Torah even Shalei Lishma? Earth, anyone? You said the question. It's what's called in English an non sequitur. It doesn't flow. It doesn't. There's no logic here. Seems superficial. Unnishnar das. The din of mitoich Shalei Lishma bol Lishma applies. The Rambam seems to be saying it's a unique, distinctive din, which is characteristics particularly of Talmud Torah. Because the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is tchilas dinui shel adam, therefore mitoich Shalei Lishma. And what about by putting on tefillin and doing any other of the 612 mitzvahs? Should you do it Shalei Lishma, should be mitoich Shalei Lishma?
Yeah, why not?
Why not? Well, here the Rambam seems to be saying that it's a unique din in Talmud Torah because of the unique qualities of Talmud Torah, that since it's tchilas dinui shel adam, therefore by Talmud Torah, logic says that you're right. Logic tells me you should apply everywhere. I don't need logic. I'm not a very logical person. But the Gemara, throughout Shas, whenever we discuss this issue, the context is not Talmud Torah. The context is mitzvahs.
There's only one mitzvah you have to have for one, and that's people.
My dear, sweet, holy friend, I'm a simple rabbi from Manchester. Pigel is in Kutchim. It's not my area of expertise. Ask Rabbi Reichert. I don't know. My face.
Because, so that your question doesn't even make sense to me.
My question doesn't make sense?
No, because you could do a mitzvah, including Talmud Torah, without being Lishma, and you fulfilled the mitzvah.
Not only with Talmud, but every other mitzvah.
Except for
That's the
people.
question.
My dear friend, so you're on my side. We and you are friends.
That's a question.
You're asking what I'm asking. You're asking.
Why he points out only
The Rambam, from the Lashon HaRambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah, it seems to be, there's a unique din to Talmud Torah. Because Talmud Torah is so distinctive, so special, that Tchilas dinui shel adam, therefore learn Torah. I'm asking you that it applies to all mitzvahs of the Torah, not just Talmud Torah. I have to give you a few examples. The Gemara says in Psachim Daf Nun, the women of Mechuzah are lazy, right? And nevertheless, they don't do work Erev Shabbos. Nevertheless, they will be rewarded for that. Even though they don't do work the whole week. They're lazy, but they get reward. But they're not doing it for the sake, because the Chacham said not to do work. The Gemara says in a few places, in the Schar, that Bolak brought up 42 karbonas on the mountain, Shaloi, you can't get a word Shaloi Bolak, right? His descendants, David, Shlomo Melech, by the consecration of the Chalukas Abayis, brought up Elef, Oilus, whatever. He was the Teich Shaloi Lishma of Bolak, came to Einikel and was Mish Lishma. There's a Gemara elsewhere, Teichacha Chacha Shaloi Lishma, Chacha Lishma, and Anova Shaloi Lishma, which is greater. Anova Shaloi Lishma, all different cases where the Gemara discusses Mitoyer Shaloi Lishma, Bol Lishma, all over Shas. We're always dealing about what? Mitzvahs. And the Horaya, I open up the Rambam Perigula Hilchos Juva, and there the Rambam is discussing it. When you teach Noshim and Amaratzim, you start off Shaloi Lishma to do mitzvahs, and in context it's clear the Rambam is not discussing Talmud Torah as a mitzvah. You're dealing with people who are not mechuyev in Talmud Torah. In observance of mitzvahs across the spectrum, in all mitzvahs of Torah, the general rule of thumb is we take Shaloi Lishma. It's clear in Rambam, in a few places in Perigula Hilchos Juva. You with me? So why is the Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah seem to be saying that it's something which is unique to Talmud Torah? You with me? Every barbe rad of the Chadyoim, anyone ever when I went to yeshiva for 3 days will know. You open up the famous Akdoma to Eglital from Navlei Avnei, and he says, "Oh, what's the difference? Because who is the author of the statement? Mitoch Shaloi Lishma Bol Lishma. That's Rav, and Rav Paskins, Rav Shas, that mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah. I don't care about your kavanah. I don't care about your lishma. The ikar is you do it. Mashe ain't kin the Rambam Paskins that mitzvahs tzrichas kavanah. You have to have the proper intention, the proper kavanah. Yes, and therefore Shaloi Lishma is not acceptable. I'll leave it up. Right? Yes. You with me? Fine. Not false. Talmud Torah doesn't need, but Talmud Torah, since the famous chiddush of the Eglital is that Talmud Torah, the hano, the benefits, the pleasure, the bliss, the delight in Torah is part and parcel of the essence of the mitzvah. It's a mitzvah to enjoy Torah, and therefore it's shekein nene. So you would say mitzvahs ain't tzrichas kavanah. Therefore, dafka by Talmud Torah, you know, when you have hano, when you have a physical pleasure, you don't need the kavanah. It's just because you're having that no, like kalam varayis, and therefore the Rambam Paskins by Talmud Torah Mitoch Shaloi Lishma. Now you don't got to be a rocket scientist to figure out. It's an eglei tal. Although the vorth of the enjoyment, the pleasure of Torah is a gavaldige vorth, but his comparison is mixing. I just could spend 3 hours talking about this eglei tal. But his mixing of concepts, of categories between lishma and mitzvah tzrichas kavanah is incredibly problematic, as all achronim ask. Mitzvah tzrichas kavanah means, I'll try to explain it as simply as possible. I take a little of an estrog in shul and I shuckle it. Why am I doing it? Let's say called Am Ve'eda, in front of everybody. Because I spent $5,000 to buy the best lulav and estrog in Manchester. Right? I forgot that the estrog stands for Altivini Regal Gaiva, the Moshe Tefet, right? Yes? But when I take the lulav and estrog and showing off to the whole world that Yosef Chazan is the most God-fearing person because I spent more money than you, right? I'm taking it, I want to fulfill the mitzvah of Lakachtan Luchem, to take the mitzvah of Dalabina. I'm having kavanah to fulfill the mitzvah. What is motivating me? What gives me the shtup, the motivation to fulfill this mitzvah? Ego, self, I. You ever notice that in the word sin, the middle letter is an I? Right? The ego. So I don't have, it's a totally shaloi lishma. Or I have kavanah when I'm taking a little bit to hereby fill the mitzvah. Hello, folks. So the extrapolation of the Avnei Nezer is a beautiful word, but it leaves a lot to be desired. So we're back to square one. Hello? What in the world is the meaning of the Rambam? Everyone understand that? Okay. Let me just summarize. Stop. Step number one. Whereas other Rishonim, yes, Rashi, Tosfos, the Tosfos Chachmei Anglia, Tosfos Maria, the Sir Leon, all the Rashba, they're all giving whole sources, who say Torah Shaloi Lishma is permissible, as long as it's not lekanter. The Rambam seems to be the most strict, the most machmir, the most restrictive of all the authorities, and the Rambam seems to say all types of Shaloi Lishma, whenever your motivation is tainted, right? Your Torah is negative, it becomes a Sama Moves, potion of death, etc., etc. So the Rambam is much more strict than everybody else. On the other hand, I open up the Rambam seems to be saying there's a unique quality in Talmud Torah which renders it supreme over any other mitzvah. Lefichach, therefore, study Torah even for the wrong reasons. And we ask, this is not a din which is unique to Talmud Torah. This seems to apply amongst all areas of Yiddishkeit. Well, so to understand this, let's go through the Alter Rebbe. And you'll see an example of how, if you just look carefully in the Alter Rebbe, it's like if you mine, in the mine, the diamonds, the gold, the silver, it's self-evident. The Alter Rebbe in Perek Dalet of Hilchos Talmud Torah Sitkim, Hoyu lefanov asiyas mitzvahs for Talmud Torah. You have a choice: perform a mitzvah or study Torah. What comes first? Folks, anyone Jewish here?
Nobody has to do the mitzvah that you learned.
Theoretically speaking, we just gave a whole shmooze that Talmud Torah is Keneged Kulam. No individual mitzvah is equal to Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah is supreme. Talmud Torah is Keim Chayev. So the mitzvah of the study of Torah takes precedent over any other mitzvah. However, if you have a mitzvah which is a mitzvah Iveris, it's a fleeting transitory mitzvah, now or never, and it's a mitzvah she'ef shel aseh le'acherim, it has to be done by you. There's no one else who can assume that mantle. Or it's a mitzvah which is a chayvus haguf, it's a personal obligation. Here I say, stop, close the Gemara, right, and start doing the mitzvah. Why? What's the logic? But Talmud Torah is Keneged Kulam. So the Alter Rebbe quotes the Gemara I said before in Brachas, Tachlis Chokmah is true of Masim Tovim. The whole purpose of learning is in order to carry out. If you don't carry it out, right, so your Torah is garnish werk, you're a rogue. Like the Rebbe says, Bereish, the famous Sikh of the Rebbe in the beginning of Chelik Tezvav, the Torah that we learn starts with Bereishis, it's Beis, which is Lashon Bracha, not Orur. There's so many words which are negative with the Beis. The Rebbe explains, if a person learns Torah, and he divorces the learning from the Bashefer, from the created and the Yisrael Torah, from the Aleph, Alufi Shel Olav, indeed his Torah becomes a Chol. Right? Famous Sikh of the Rebbe. Everyone calls this. Yes? I said before a story. There was his former Israeli president called Ephraim Navon. And unlike other presidents who are often ignorant of basic Yiddishkeit, there was a previous president who was called up, he was in Chutz La'aretz, he went to a shul on Shabbos, right? And they said, what was his name? No. Yitzhak Navon. No, the other president was, he was in shul, and the Gabbai went to him and says, Yamod Ephraim ben, he said, Shishim V'Shesh. He didn't have a clue. He'd never been in a shul before. You know? This guy, Yitzhak Navon, is an enigal of the Machne Ephraim, whose name was Ephraim Navon, that's why I got mixed up, yeah? Machne Ephraim. And he knew about Yiddish. And once he was in Yerushalayim, he had a communal issue, and he went to speak to the Ger Rebbe. It's the chutzpah story. It's a phenomenal story. I always quote this. And he sees a queue of Chassidim, Groisvi the Golas, and they're waiting to go into the Rebbe. So this president of the state of Israel turns to the Ger Rebbe, and he says, Rebbe, you have so many Chassidim waiting here in the queue, in the line. When do you have a chance to learn Torah for yourself? The Goy Samaskid is asking the Ger Rebbe. Right? So the Ger Rebbe said a moed Gemara, which doesn't swarm, but it's a teeth of words. The Gemara says, Imroya Odam Shiyasurim Boim Olav Yefashvish R'Maisiv. If your person Nebuch is afflicted, you have tzoros, engage in introspection, look into your deeds. Pish v'loy motzo. You're an Isha Emes. You looked into your inner recesses of your soul. You went through all Taryag mitzvahs. You found no deficiency, no chesaronis. Yitla ba'avoy b'tul Torah. Assume it's for the Aveira of b'tul Torah. The glaring question, the $64,000 question that everybody asks is, if you're an Emes person, and you're going to make a cheshbon hanefesh, and tchilas din shel adam is a different time, the first thing you looked into was different Torah. And you saw pish v'loy motzo. You're an Isha Emes. We talk about a chakran. Someone's delusional, then the Gemara doesn't start. Right? So what do you mean, Yitla ba'avoyim b'tul Torah? The Ger Rebbe said, a moirizik of words. A mol that you're sitting and learning a mimer, you're learning a salsa, shmeitza, whatever, you're horoving at a baruch ber. Great. And someone says, Rabbi, come with me, let's go on with Soyim, let's help another yid. The person needs a chesed, a person needs a whatever, to put on tefillin. Kenish b'tul Torah. Yitla ba'avoyim b'tul Torah. That the Aveira that you schreibe b'tul Torah, when sometimes you have to close the Gemara and get up and do something. It's a mitzvah Averis. That's the Aveira that avoyim b'tul Torah. You hear what I'm saying? So therefore, it's a mitzvah Averis, Alter Rebbe says. But if you get, why? Because if you're going to learn intellectually, but you're not going to carry it. I always said this story before. There was a chassid, I don't know, Polish somewhere, when going to hit one Shabbos a year, he'd go to his Rebbe. That was his Shabbos. Right? That was his Shabbos. Akitzra Masa, on the way, the axle of the carriage fell off, the horse died, every tzara in the book. And Nebuchadnezzar couldn't get to his Rebbe for Shabbos. He had to spend the town in a town of Shabbos, in a town where people were non-chassidically challenged people. The guy could not wait to get out of there, out of Shabbos. The minute after Shabbos, he hired himself a new balagula. He went to his Rebbe. The Rebbe sees him and says, Yankel, where were you? It was your Shabbos. Where were you? It was felt. When it's you weren't there. So he poured out his heart all the sorrows that happened to him on the way. He wasn't able to make it. Where were you for Shabbos? And this shtetl. So the Rebbe says, ooh, Dorn's Grace alumdim, scholarly people, academics, they shiurim, it's gehert, it's pilpul. Lamhan, it's a victory you heard on Shabbos, to didn't. The Chassid was a sharp guy. He says, Rebbe, they kvetchen, azoi fil, ashayla von schita Shabbos. Shabbos, you're not allowed to squeeze. So they kvetchen, azoi fil, ashayla von schita. You're not allowed to squeeze on Shabbos. So the Rebbe smiled and he said, Zo sich nicht, gar nicht kommt da raus. Don't worry, nothing comes out. In other words, you could kvetch. Oh, but if you divorce the limud HaTorah from the noisin HaTorah, Torah Lishma, it's a garnish. Right? So the Alter Rebbe then says, and if you're going to learn Torah without carrying it out, your Torah becomes a samamovis, and upon this category of person, David HaMelech says in Tehillim that the Almighty says, God says you're to a rasha, to an evildoer, to a rogue, don't bother touching my Torah, don't contaminate. Very sharp words, no? Samademus. Then the Alter Rebbe continues, V'yesh Av, a dissenting opinion. This is the normative, authoritative opinion. V'yesh Av, parentheses in the Kudus Achen, Meneiris Hamor, classical medieval Musar work. Listen, V'chein das harambam b'mashtakos lefich. And this is the opinion of the Rambam in using that word lefichach we queried before. That even if what afal pichein, even though you're a rogue, and the Eibush just said on you, your Torah becomes poison. Samamovas. And don't dare study my Torah. Don't you dare study Torah nonetheless. The Rebbe Rashab once said a mirror to Gemara. Someone Sadik said, others said. The Rebbe Rashab brings it. The Gemara says, "Kol asher yoyim lecha balabayis asay." The axiom in Talmud. Whatever the balabos, your host, you're at someone's house. Whatever he commands you, follow the directives of your host, his guidance, his command. Except if he says, door, scram, exit, beat it, get lost. Said the Rebbe Rashab, you know who the emes of balabos of this world is? The Rebbe Rashab. Kol asher yoyim lecha, the Eibush says, whatever he tells you, command. We're here to carry out his will. Chutz mitzay. If the Eibush says, get lost, beat it, how dare you show your face in my besmedish? You're going to come to a shir after what you were up to, the tricks you were up to last night. Get lost, out of here. Chutz mitzay. That's the one thing you don't have to listen to the Rebbeinu Shalom. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, L'rosh HaMalikim, Malach HaLasaper Chukay. Says the Alter Rebbe, V'yesh Omer, Samor V'chein Das Harama Mashagod L'fich, nevertheless study it. Right? What's Pshat? Shamoir Shabbat, famous Yerushalmi, Machzir L'Mutav. You're studying Torah, it's tainted, it's sinful, it's garnished. And so brings the Alter Rebbe in Maimorim Ketzorim. The Alter Rebbe is short Maimorim. I'll read the Lashon. Be'inyan Eisek HaTorah Shaloi Lishma. The Alter Rebbe quotes the Tosfos. And Tosfos is the distinction between levels of Shaloi Lishma. Ashirus, Kovid, Rebbe, right? Which is b'di'ova permissible and b'kanter not. Says the Alter Rebbe, V'ze'eni Masbid. Tosfos' distinction is insufficient. The Mala Lona L'chalik B'kavonas Abrius. It makes no difference what the fellow's intention was. Hakol Nikra Shaloi Lishma. It's all Shaloi Lishma, and it's all prohibited. Right? It's all the same. And where is the source of this Alter Rebbe? Today, Baruch Hashem, the Sfarim are printed. If you take a look in the Tshuvas HaRambam, which is only printed in the last few hundred years, right? There the Alter Rebbe says, he also queried Tosfos Shayla. Two different. Should you learn Torah Lishma? Should you not?
If anyone only put into 12:30, you have to put in money to your meters. The city will give you a free ticket. Okay.
Torah is Magnum Matzla. What do you mean? What goes on in Los Angeles? It must be Torah. It must be Torah Lishma. I got to do tshuva. Okay. Says the Rambam, in the Shuvah that of Torah Lishma hu ha'ikar. Listen to a lashon. Listen to a lashon Rambam. V'lo nitztavinu ela lasik bo lishma. The whole mitzvah of limud haTorah is contingent on learning lishma. V'oisek shaloi lishma roi lo shloi nivra. The Rambam is the most stringent, the most machmir, demanding the purest of motives in learning Torah. V'afal pikein, continue the Rambam, toiv le'lasik bo shaloi lishma, etc., etc. Say the Marach or Zarua, the same thing. Cool. There's no difference. Unlike Tosfos and Rashi and whatever, different chalukim. Says the Marach or Zarua, the Kul and Avera. All types of Shaloi Lishma is being the Shtamish Betago. You're making it a Kardum Lachbarbo. It's prohibited. It's an Avera, but it's an Avera which is permitted. You hear what's going on? Where did the Rambam get this from? Where did Alter Rebbe get this from? That's the Rambam. The Rambam started off the halacha by saying, "Tchilas dinei shel adam eino elal divrei Torah." The first question you're asked is what? Divrei Torah. Yes? Divrei Torah. If your Torah, which is not carried out, is a totally useless, redundant Sama Demovis, so think to yourself, so why in the world does it make sense that Tchilas dinei shel adam should be Divrei Torah? First, let's see what kind of character you had, how observant you were. And if you were observant and you were a decent bloke, then we could say your Torah can have value. We'll go into Torah. Why is Tchilas dinei shel adam Torah? Is the Charaya that what? The fact that Torah is the first question, we have a promise from the Rabbeinu Shalom that if you learn his Torah sooner or later, that Torah will penetrate, will affect you. So Torah therefore has intrinsic, innate value in and of itself. As I say, Chassidim always used to say, there are three things that are certain to work. You imbibe alcohol, you take mashke, you're going to get drunk. You get drunk. There are people who could drink a bottle of mashke and still quote my Morim Balpeh or whatever. Drink a bit more. Sooner or later. Money makes a person a bit, whatever, disconnects. Right? Some people have money and they're fine, upright, shmaka people. A bit more and sooner or later it'll get to your head. Your ego will explode. Chassidus makes a person able. You and I know people who learn Chassidus. And they have a long way to go in Edelkeit. Right? Learn a bit more. Sooner or later, there's a promise. So the fact that Tchilas dinei shel adam is on divrei Torah is gufa raya that Torah doesn't have to talk about it. It has to affect that Torah. Therefore, has innate value. Therefore, you should learn Torah even shaloi lishma. When it comes to other mitzvahs, it goes without saying. It's self-evident that I don't have to wait till I do the mitzvah lishma. I'll be waiting till Mashiach comes. Do it. It's common sense. Talmud Torah, we're learning Torah Shaloi Lishma is the Chaveira L'Shitas HaRambam. It's an Aveira. And the whole mitzvah of Talmud Torah was only given Lishma. Kumt is the felt in the Chefts of Talmud Torah. In the midst of Talmud Torah. So therefore you would think by Talmud Torah only learn Lishma. Nay, that's the Chiddush Lefichach. Since that comes first, and even though it may be an Aveira, it's improper, it's negative, but the power of Torah will have an effect. And that's how it's said in Sforim, just to conclude. Sforim HaKadoshim say, it says, Kosas lamoyer, like Kosas lebenachos. When you squeeze an olive, the Shemen Zayis to make olive oil, right? Lamoyer v'loy lebenachos. In other words, the olive oil which is used for the menorah to bring radiance, right, has to be much purer, grade AAA, more than for menachos. For meal offerings, we had Shemen. What's the difference? Say this for him. Emes, Davinezer, well, speak about it. Torah has two qualities. Gemara says, "Ma'amina masmi'ilu." Those who learn Torah Lishma, so Torah elevates, Torah exalts, Torah changes a person, becomes a totally new material, a new person. Then it's only Torah Lishma. But Torah, besides elevating a person to Shmei Morim, Torah also takes away the gemeinkeit, the gerubkeit, the whatever. That's atoning, wiping away the past. Causes that moir v'leil menachos for the menachos, for the masmi'ilim bo. When your whole purpose is to atone, to cleanse, to wipe away, even if your Torah is not so pure. Abi, learn. I'll give you an example. Now, going back, Asher Alki, now I understand what numerous, the Rebbe Sicha we heard last night, but numerous places in Igros Kodesh where the Rebbe speaks about Torah is for everybody. Those are the Rebbe Shit, going back. Regardless of Ahin, regardless of Aher, Hamoir, Shabo, Machzir Lemut. And this was a debate going back to antiquity. By the way, while I'm talking, I'm thinking, you remember last week's parasha? It was yesterday. You can't forget it by now. The birth of Moshe Rabbeinu. You know, there was great, very heated, vehement debate 100 years ago about what did the famous legend, story, that a Arabian king wanted to know what was the secret of Moshe Rabbeinu's success. So he had physiognomists, people who were makmakir chokmas apartzis, and he had artists, and they went to draw a picture of Moshe Rabbeinu, portrait, came back to the king, and they saw that Moshe looked like a yahrtzeit, Eustace, a burglar, a highwayman, a robber, with like grub. When you study the physiognomy, right, he looked terrible, right. So the king was like had him shot, whatever, had him hung. The psychiatrist, the physiologist, the painters, whatever, and he's not getting anywhere. He went himself to Moshe Rabbeinu and he asked him. He sees Takazai, that the portrait was correct, and he said that he was born with these negative traits, right? And he worked on himself. He worked on his character, and this is printed in Tiferes Yisrael on Mishnah, in Masechta Kiddushin, on the Mishnah Tov Shebarei from the Gehenna. When this came out, 30 years after it came out, there was a Margid of Vilkamir, of Aaron Yitzchak, Aaron somebody or other, from who's Mishnah Magid. He wrote a whole kundras attacking it. He asked him from the Aderes, asked him from Mishlet Diskin. It's apikursus kfir and minas to say that Moshe Rabbeinu was born with negative traits. Sie geboren a ganz shakler tari, a ganz ashler rabbi mit tutzachene. There is no place, as far as we know, in Medrash which brings the story. Secular academics want to say the story happened with Cicero. Cicero brings it regarding Aristotle, Socrates, whatever. In Chassidish Sforim, though, it's brought all over the place.
It's what?
It's brought all over the place. Arpnei Moshe, Moshe Vursker, it's brought in Degel Machnei Ephraim, it's brought in Shem Yishmol. You got 1,000, I'm not finding out about 1,000, B'Shem Aval Shem. That's true. In Yesh Omrim, that was the debate when it says, V'Teira Oisik Hi Toivu Moshe Rabbeinu, yesterday, right? So Chazal says, Machloikis or Meir Rabbi Yehuda in Medrash, Chadamer Toiv Shmai, his name was Toiv, and Chadamer Toiv Yishmai. Hello? What does that do for you in Los Angeles in the year 2000 or whatever, whether his name was Toiv or Tovia? The Fortune explained, that was the Shaila in Chazal. Was Moshe born naturally with these exalted traits? Or was his neshama very, very derhoiben, takin smale bayis oira, over his guf mitzad the physical? Everyone knows Chassidus, Moshe Rabbeinu, and contradistinction to Eliyahu, was oivdi Hashem ben shmosam, but oivdi Hashem beguf. What was the teva of Moshe as a human being like? And Chassidus From says a mullah person can have a negative teva, and he overcomes. And a person that's shoiver yitzroi overcomes his natural inclination even greater. How do you do so? The whole shtuz in itself. But how do you do so? That is the kuyach of Torah to transform. Let me just leave you with one thought. This debate of how far you should spread Torah, to whom? Does Torah belong to an elite, noble 1% of the population? Or is Torah the Rosh Hakilas Yank of every single individual Jew? And to deprive a Jew of chinuch is to deprive him of life, right? It's a debate which goes about to antiquity and obvious to Rav Nosson. On the mission of Amidus Amilim Harbe, it was a debate between Mesil and Meshamai, and across the ages. One of the manifestations of this, according to many commentaries, was the famous Gemara in Brachos. The Gemara says that when Rav Gamliel was the Nosi, the head of the academy, he had a very restrictive enrollment policy, and he had a shomer on the Beis Medrash, and the shomer, the guard, would proclaim, Kol Talmud she'ein toiche kebari al yikonos the Beis Medrash. If inside and outside is not one and the same, if you have a strand of hypocrisy within you, if you're not motivated for the right reasons, don't you dare entering Rabbi Gamliel's Beis Medrash. Oisi Ayoim, the famous story in the Gemara Brachos, when Gamliel was deposed, and young 18-year-old Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was appointed. New policy, open enrollment, everyone come in. 400, 700 new benches were added. Right? The Chayza of Lublin, the great Hasidic masters, once asked a simple question. Tell me, how in the world, where do you find a shomer, a guard? Which security company do you employ to bring a guard to the Beis Medrash, and he rejects those who are not Teichei Kabare, and he accepts those people who are utterly inner sincere, in the inner recess? Who would know such a thing if you're Teichei Kabare, besides the Bashefer? So the Chayz of Lublin said, Yosef Galil was the Nosi, and as the Rebbe always brings, Nosi is the Rosh Tevis, Notrikon, Nitzutz Shel Yankiv Avinu. He was the Tzaddik Ador. Tzaddik Ador is Shalit B'matu B'mal, heaven and earth. the Gamliel was Geyser, and a Malach Hashem Tzvaka came in a Shemayim, and he became the Shomer, right? And he said, "You are rein, you are Reis. You in, you out." That was the statement of the Holy Chayzul. The Talmidim, his disciples, were discussing this issue, and someone asked, "If you were Taka Toicha was not Kibara, you're a rogue, you're a hypocrite, you're a bit of a cheat. So how did you have the schus to see a Malach Hashem face to face?" They're querying the Rebbe's, the Chayz's, Seri b'chesel kashmir, a moiriti kavod. The Malach was not pshat that an Eliel summoned the employment agency in heaven somewhere in Priya. You know, could you send me down a Malach as a Shomer the Mismedrash? The Malach is in everyone's heart, on the Chol HaSmoli, on the left side of the ventricle of your heart. And the Malach says, "You Yankel, you want to come learn? You want to start learning Chassidus? How dare you? I know who you are. You're a hypocrite. You're not Teichei Kibare. How dare you come into this Medrash?" Therefore, this Malach is the Yetzer Hara, and this is the Malach we have to uproot. A person has to know this is the lesson of the Alter Rebbe, because action that I'm more Shoah Machzir Lemutav. The more Torah we learn, the more Edel we become, and we're Makabel Pnei Mashiach.
Thank you very much. Everybody remember tonight is the Shleichim for Rav Mendel.